Okay, so we'll get started. So my name is Lisa Padden, and I'll be joined by my two colleagues today, Daniel Elliott and Kathy Orr. We all work in UCD Access and Lifelong Learning. You may know us from such things as the digital badges, which we'll talk about this morning, but today, or this afternoon rather, today we're going to talk about UDL, does it work? So our framework for addressing or assessing the impact of universal design. So it was mentioned earlier in terms of the need for additional research and to demonstrate the impact of universal design and universal design for learning in particular. So we're going to talk a bit about the context and about the digital badges, and we'll talk a bit about some research that we did last year looking at those who had completed the badge over the years. So we've been rolling out the badge since 2019. And then you'll hear about our plans in terms of impact measurement and our new universal design badge. And we have a workshop activity for you as well. So in terms of the numbers who've already completed the digital badge, we have over 5,700 now have done either the Universal Design for Teaching and Learning or Universal Design Beyond the Classroom badge, and 720 have also completed the Facilitator badge, and many of our facilitators are here at the conference today, all of whom we wouldn't have our 5,700 badge awardees. So it's a huge amount of work. So we have this enormous number of people and educators in Ireland who've now completed a badge. And last year we carried out some research. So we developed a relatively short survey, and thanks to anybody here who completed it. So it was created really in consultation with other colleagues across the sector. So Maureen Harron, who you heard from earlier, Dara obviously as well from AHEAD, and some other colleagues from HE, FET and beyond. We had the survey open for, I think, about 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks in March and April, and we captured both quantitative and qualitative data. So we asked whether or not those who've gotten the badge were continuing to embed UDL or use the UDL framework. So whether it had been just a one-time educational experience for them or they were actually continuing to use what they had learned. We asked about the perceived benefits and challenges of embedding UDL, the diversity of the student cohorts that these educators had, and the evidence of impact on student attainment or engagement. And we also asked about the resource implications of embedding UDL, because that's something we would hear about quite a bit. I should say, in terms of the survey, we carried out the survey with those who'd done the Universal Design for Teaching and Learning badge only. So at the time, that was 4,426 badge holders. So majority, or well, slightly more than half were from higher education, so 57.3% versus 42.7% in further education. And the response rate is interesting when you look at the year that people were awarded the badge, because we had respondents from every year that we had rolled out the badge. And you can see the year when we started doing the MOOC style online rollouts was 2020, 2021, when the number of respondents jumps up there. But we had a good response, a proportionate response, I would say, from every year that we had rolled out the badge up to the research itself. So we asked whether or not people were still teaching, and then we asked whether or not they were still using UDL in their work. So 84.6% of those who were still teaching and 70% of those who weren't were still using UDL. So again, showing the kind of beyond the classroom part as well. But really the vast majority of people still using UDL in their work. And I'm going to hand over to Kathy now to tell you about the next part of the research.
So we also asked participants to think about one module or class in which they implemented universal design for learning. So that might have been maybe as part of their redesign, which is the assessment activity for the badge, or it might have been since that. And we asked them what their implementation addressed. So the majority said that their implementation addressed teaching learning activities or their classroom practices, maybe making those a bit more active or a bit more flexibility and choice possibly. Then next came the addressing of the accessibility of their materials and assessment and or feedback. 4.9% of them, their implementation involved student partnership or co-creation. And then there was a small amount who also looked at the area of co-curricular or beyond the classroom activities. And we asked respondents to measure how successful they felt their implementation of UDL was on a scale of 1, not at all, to 5, extremely. And it was really heartening to see that there's almost 79% there that thought it was either very or extremely successful. And then, which is kind of demonstrating, I suppose, the sustainability of UDL in their practice. We also asked them how resource intensive the implementation of UDL was, and unsurprisingly, so there's kind of over 30% there felt it was either very or extremely resource intensive. We asked participants of the survey if they felt the implementation was successful, then to select the relevant success criteria. And the majority there, 77.8%, felt that it increased learner engagement. It also increased satisfaction for them as educators. They felt it improved the accessibility of their materials, improved learner results, improved learner feedback, engagement, collaboration with colleagues, and also positive feedback from program or department. So the survey asked about challenges, and unsurprisingly, the challenges around implementation of UDL were time constraints, the lack of resources, and then a big one, varying levels of institutional resources and support. And this was particularly critical for respondents working in further education and training in order, they felt, for their sustained embedding of universal design for learning. So we asked questions around how practitioners could be supported further, particularly in relation to measuring the impact of universal design for learning, because obviously that is a driver for embedding universal design for learning in institutions. And here's just some qualitative feedback here. One area that needs attention in UDL is evidence to support it and indeed critique it. Another piece of feedback, they would like a framework or a toolkit at institutional level to encourage program level initiatives to embed UDL. And that was in response to the question, what would facilitate you to conduct, disseminate and/or publish research in the area of UDL? So actions arising out of the survey here in UCD, the first action is to build an impact framework to support staff in measuring UDL impact. And it really would guide people through that process of, of kind of measuring the impact of their UDL learning intervention, particularly if they're not familiar with conducting research or not familiar with conducting research in this area. It would be, so it's underway at the moment, and it's a collation of validated tools which will measure learner engagement, educator satisfaction, accessibility of resources, learner attainment and learner feedback. And then the second action arising out of the survey is the development of an accompanying universal design digital badge. And we find the digital badge is really effective. We have lucky enough to have received funding from the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning for this badge. And that kind of MOOC style, as Lisa mentioned, in the 25 hours of learner effort, and the peer element where people get to meet and share with colleagues, and a really practical redesign assignment has been very effective. So this third badge would support the impact framework. It would be for people who want to build knowledge and confidence in this area, and also to meet like-minded colleagues. And the idea is that it will be piloted in January 2027. And it will follow a similar format in terms of timings to the other two badges. So I'm just going to hand over to Daniel there for the workshop element.
Can you hear me okay? You can now, definitely. Okay. Hi, everyone. So my name is Daniel Elliott, and I obviously work with Lisa and Kathy. And when Kathy says that the work is ongoing, that is hugely down to herself doing a lot of this. You can't get away from that one, Kathy. I am going to embarrass you. So really what we're trying to look at is what are the ways that people are measuring impact already within the teaching and learning space, within the student engagement piece. Because, as we say, we don't want a framework. Obviously, we want a UDL framework on measuring the impact of UDL, but equally, we don't want this to be an additional thing. We want to be able to, something that people can embed within their existing ways of measuring impact already. So we do have, and it would be helpful if I move these along. So what we would like to get you to do, if you are, yeah. Sorry, thanks, Erica. Okay, won't get in front of that mic with this mic. So we would just ask you to scan this QR code or use the link there for the Google form. We've got a really, really quick 4-question survey there. If you're not working in a kind of a role that is either looking at measuring the impact in the teaching and learning environment or indeed student engagement, and you would like a case study, we have a little scenario if anybody would like that, or if you're happy doing this, please do so. We'll give you about 5 minutes to go through that, and then we really want to get everybody in the room talking. Is that link working okay for everybody? Super, okay. So take 5 minutes. If anybody would prefer a little case study to work through, please let me know. for inputting your responses. And I can see some of them are coming in already, so thank you very much. Happy New Year. Okay, so you've definitely been busy, because I can see. So anybody want to give us a little bit of a sense of what you or your organization are already collecting? And I'm told I can move around, but I'm not to stand underneath the speakers, so I'm going to play a magic dance of moving around them. Well, I can definitely see that some people are measuring learner engagement and some learner attainment. Sorry, couldn't see you.
Can you hear me all right? I don't think you can. Oh, you can. Okay. Great. I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Yes, so Ed, did you want to talk a little bit about what you and your organization are already measuring at the moment?
No, I'm not exactly measuring them myself. It's
Okay.
more kind of second party kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But there is a fair amount of what I'm trying to actually measure myself at the moment is more kind of like, how do I phrase it? User flows through our LMS. So like, you know, users usually start at this, then they go to this module, then they go to this assignment and try and get a better idea of what people are actually doing within it. That's my own personal thingamajig.
Cool.
The actual institute itself, they are measuring like attendance stat anyway, is kind of an obvious one. And there are some apps that help with that and users can check in themselves and things. Outside of that, I'm afraid I'm only involved in some elements of it, but they are measuring oh God, it'd be like hit rates for things and some amount of engagement, but some amount, and it's in certain ways and not other ways and things like that. It gets, the more broad you try to make it, almost the more niche it becomes to a certain extent. The more training information you get, the more you realize it's actually focusing in on a certain area.
Okay.
That has probably made things more grey, but that is kind of the gist of it, I'm afraid.
Okay. Interesting. And is that that last piece there you're talking about, is that on your VLE when you're talking about hit rates, or?
Kind of, well, mostly is probably it. There are other systems that come into play.
Yeah.
That would be kind of measured to kind of give similar-ish results.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay, great. So a technical way of doing it.
That's my area.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else? Don't be shy. Come on, it's a workshop. I'll start picking on people. I know. I'm joking. Kind of. Thank you, Olive.
Thanks, Erica. Our situation is that lots of data is being captured, but in different places.
Yeah.
And it's not connected.
Yeah.
So, you know, we might have student support services using a CRM system, which is capturing a certain amount of data. We then have a library system, which is capturing other data. Our virtual learning environment capturing other data. So, you know, what I'd like what I filled in the last question is that we had connected systems so that you were almost able to see a student on a page.
Yeah.
And see, okay, what does this journey footprint look like for the student? Where are they engaging or not engaging? You know, who are the heavy users or not heavy users? We don't have that data connected. So while it's been looked at in silos by different people, it isn't being looked at collectively for mapping the whole student journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're similar in UCD in that, you know, all of our support services are almost siloed within our student management system. And that doesn't link in with our VLE, and that's definitely not connected with what's happening in the classrooms in terms of what our faculty and tutors are seeing as well. Yeah. Tomas, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I guess one of the things that comes up for me a lot is that when you ask people in different institutions what they're measuring, they don't seem to know a lot of time communication. And then even sometimes within the same institution, I find that people have conflicting reports, or one people will be like, oh, we don't really measure anything. And then you speak to another colleague and they'd be like, we measure lots. So I think, again, someone I mentioned it earlier today was about that communication piece. And I think that's a big part of it. And I guess one of the things, I was at a conference in Switzerland there last year. And one of the things that they were doing that was really interesting was, well, I thought anyway, was they were using data analytics from their VLE to track students' progression and those who weren't engaging with the system and trying to predict behavior around retention, which I thought was really interesting. And part of me thinking, oh, that would be actually interested in terms of maybe AWP and in terms of that inclusive space as well. And how do we cipher that off and how do we look at that? So for me, that's a place where we can start to see indicators. It isn't a sole indicator, obviously, but it is one of those things where you're starting to see. I think everything that we do now is. I was just having this conversation a minute ago about the kind of multidisciplinary approach that we kind of need to take, but also recognizing that this person here has data that combines with my data, and I couldn't agree more with what Olive said. For me, that like we're bringing in new systems right now to replace systems that I think, and then another faculty within the same division is bringing in another tool, and I'm just like, why aren't we all using? No, there's a lot of reasons why we're not, but it makes the management and tracking of data and presenting, you know, why things are happening in such a difficult way. And, you know, I'd also, if I'm being honest, I'd be concerned about some of the systems we're bringing in terms of wanting to focus on a solely quantitative lens and then not bringing in that quality, drawing out that quality. I know the quality can be subjective, but yeah, so for me, there's, like most things in terms of higher ed now, there's a lot of multiple factors feeding into the situation. It's very hard to get to the crux of what should be included and what shouldn't, and what is actually creating that issue in the end, like, you know, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. There was a study, colleagues actually, Tomas, did something a bit similar to what you're talking about in UCD. I didn't even know it happened until quite recently. So again, back to your communications, you know, we often don't know what's happening in our own institutions, but they were tracking students' engagement, the touch points, similar to your point, on the VLE, and seeing if there was a way, if students stopped disengaging after week 4, you know, is there an alert system? Can a student advisor kind of get in contact with them? And does, you know, were there patterns there in terms of students' outcomes and retention patterns? And again, like I'm just thinking as well, it'd be really interesting to look at that and seeing if the types of assessments that are being used in those modules, or indeed different modules, does that impact how a student is engaging? You know, if we've got slightly more continuous assessment, does that impact the student's engagement? You kind of think it should, you know, do positively, and then other times you're be slightly worried the data is going to tell you something else. Anybody else want to come in? If we were kind of thinking pie in the sky, you know, Olive, to your point, what would we, you know, what would be something we're not able to capture at the moment, but we would be able to capture? What would that look like? Yes.
I'm coming from Hibernia College, so we're
Mhm.
predominantly online and
Yeah.
blended format, and obviously we're really interested in. There's loads of options within the kind of online space that kind of open up UDL conversations kind of naturally because it's maybe some students will find that that's a more inherently inclusive environment regardless of their learning needs. But I suppose one of the things that I'm always really interested in is to the point that the speaker was saying over there about what we're looking for in terms of data of how students are interacting with our VLE or where they're dropping off or how they're interacting with their online learning environments. And I'm always really curious about the digital literacy piece around it, that we can assume on the part of staff and students that they are all interacting with that same environment in the same way. And I think maybe it's a harder data to capture if they're not, and we don't know why, if it's not actually, if the evidence doesn't point to that it's an assessment issue or that there's an accessibility issue on whatever platform that we're using. And I think it can be something that particularly adult learners are really reluctant to kind of want to admit to, and that staff members can also be really reluctant to want to admit to that they feel that they want to learn more in that area, or that they feel like they're not using, it's obviously a big part of our UDL strategy, but that it's maybe not being used effectively for staff or students, or that there's not maybe enough kind of vulnerability there to admit to varying levels of digital literacy or understanding of kind of digital platforms. Because I think a lot of the UDL conversations that we have, obviously for us, because we're an online platform, but with other universities increasingly kind of include an online learning environment as part of that and as a way of addressing a lot of the kind of more traditional barriers.
Yeah.
So I guess like pie in the sky, I'm like, I would love to read students' minds in terms of what they are actually experiencing as an online learning environment versus what we think we're providing.
Yeah. And do you find, because a lot of people, when they talk about digital literacy skills, they do cite kind of your more mature learners, and there being a gap, particularly if they're coming back to education. But also, I suppose, a thing that other people have talked about who are far more qualified than me in this space, the digital affecting kind of younger students who absolutely know how to TikTok the bejesus out of something, but when it comes to creating something like an old-fashioned Word doc or using Word or old-fashioned PowerPoint, they have not engaged with that at all. Do you see a sort of gap like that?
Yeah, we would find that, and we would also find maybe it's more kind of harder to pin down attitude towards things like the formality of uploading something in a certain format, as you mentioned, or Turnitin reports, things like that, that there's maybe an implied casualness for some students. I don't know if that's necessarily generational, but it can have kind of significant enough academic income or outcomes, or it can affect someone's academic journey if they are consistently kind of slightly missing those, whether it's an informal communication or formal communication challenge, or whether it's an upload piece, or whether it's accessing a resource or realizing too late that you have been accessing something incorrectly or uploading something incorrectly, and then that can have like a significant kind of impact if there's an academic outcome because of that.
Okay, great, thank you. Anybody else with pie in the sky ideas? That's okay.
So just to circle back to something that Thomas said about kind of almost predictive analytics around student engagement. The LEAP project that you mentioned, Daniel, they looked at library engagement, they looked at the VLE stats, but also they actually got students to scan in their attendance. So they knew whether or not students were turning up, but that's very controversial. And then there are obviously data protection issues around all that, but it was a really interesting project, and it was interesting to look at those models in terms of where students drop off and what interventions might help in terms of actually re-engaging students. Pie in the sky idea for me would be if students had a very simple mechanism to kind of self-reflect on their learning weekly, so that they could track where they were, and that would feed back to their lecturer, who could then make adjustments based on whether or not students were where they expected them to be at particular points in the module. So rather than us looking back, it would actually help students in a kind of live way. But the predictive analytics bit can be dangerous, because that can be used in some jurisdictions and is used to exclude students from accessing higher education. So if you're not a good bet for success, then we won't let you in the first place. So it can be problematic depending on what purpose we use the data for. So that's, yeah, always a little bit scary when you think about using large data models like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just thinking as well, you'd love to be able to link up a system that we're kind of talking about, and also trying to measure students' engagement with each other. You know, because I'm thinking about the model that we use with the digital badge, and the peer groups are often the thing that sustain people's engagement with it and finishing the program. And we know once students have a group of people around them, you know, whether they're friends or whoever they do, are more likely to continue. But it'd be really interesting to see if you did more group work or had some of those opportunities to collaborate. Does that sustain them in their education more? Or how do you measure that?
If you look at the impact of COVID, where there was a complete lack of social connection or peer connection for students coming into education, I think that's good evidence for how important it is for people to sustain, particularly when they enter into a new program, having social connection. But in terms of how you measure that or how you improve it, that's the big challenge, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just having a quick look if anybody else had put in some interesting responses that we haven't quite talked about yet.
Daniel currently judging if you're interesting or not.
No, I'm seeing if we have talked about it yet. Anybody else want to come in terms of what a framework should or could look like, or what should be in this new digital badge that we're developing?
I might just grab the mic. Why I'm so interested in the project, I suppose, is there's coming from an FE background and never really having conducted research, there's a whole mythology around like who's entitled to conduct research, and it's like a kind of it always felt to me as kind of the preserve of higher education. So what's exciting for me is the demystification, I suppose, of the whole process and the democratization. And, you know, we're all entitled to measure the impact of changes, you know, UD-informed changes that we make to our practices. So that's what I'm looking forward to, is to just, but obviously, I suppose we just welcome all the feedback that we can as to what you would like to see in it and what would be useful for you.
Absolutely, Kathy, and I'm thinking like around the dissemination piece, to our colleague from Ulster University talking about that media training in you know, and you know, journal articles are not the be all and end all, and shouldn't be. You know, we're thinking about research in a broad way. And Lisa, to your point on there was the other colleague from Belgium who had the diary entries of students, the journaling. I thought that was a really, really interesting way of capturing what's going on. And it could be a different way that we're not necessarily thinking about at the moment.
I might just step out of my MC role and into my head role. But I think while it's really valuable, I think it's a bit scary. I think maybe for everyone here, realizing, you know, it might not always be the most successful thing. This, you know, universal design has become kind of on a pedestal, big word topic, where we're like, you know, is this conference necessary? It's a bit scary to think about. Obviously, we see the positive benefits, but whenever you do this research, I think it's just a bit, you're stepping back and evaluating your own work. And, you know, we put so much time and effort into it, and is it working? So I think it's definitely a valuable piece of work, but also just want to address how scary it is at the same time, I guess.
Yeah, and one of the things we've been working on with some of the student partners who are on inside, and that's absolutely where you should be instead of listening to us. They're talking about a module accessibility review, and they're kind of doing a reverse mentoring with some of their faculty, reviewing the accessibility of the module the learning materials, on Brightspace, on our VLE. And one of the pieces of feedback that we got when we did some faculty focus groups was, okay, absolutely, I can go in and make all of the slides, meeting all the color contrast guidelines. I can do the captions, I can do the other bits and pieces, but how do I know if it has had any impact? Because, module feedback doesn't ask those questions, and whether or not students actually engage with module feedback is a different story. But it would be interesting to kind of have something in a really simple way for students to be able to give quick feedback when they have been able to utilize those things in a positive way. Because, I suppose, again, somebody else earlier was talking about, we only ever hear from students when it's negative. I think it was you, Victoria, in terms of, so it would be nice to know when things are actually going well too, and having a quick sense check as well. Yep.
Dara from ahead. Yeah, it was just to commend the work that UCD are doing, as always, leading the way in these areas. It's so important that we think more about measuring impact. But one of the things I was thinking about was just the need within the course to maybe also address, to equip people with arguments that help them to push back against the narrative that there is a narrative out there that it's not evidence-based, which is a completely wrong narrative. And it's always one of those challenges with, say, something like UDL is, it's essentially, it's an evidence-based toolbox. All of the individual tools are very evidence-based, but it's the interaction between the educator and the tool to do the right job is where sometimes things get mismatched. So it's a difficult one to unpick, but I just think it's one of those things that's really important, is also to arm people with that understanding so that they can also have meaningful conversations with colleagues around that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We can definitely use the badge for that purpose, Dara. Anybody else want to come in? Final words before our final words. Go on, I dare one of you. Okay. Great. So in terms of what is next steps for us, I will stand up here. We are doing more consultation with the sector. So we are, you'll probably be hearing from us again. And we are currently developing the badge impact, or the UDL impact framework. So, and then the pilot of the new digital badge will be in January 2027. We had it right on a previous slide, not January this year, which is already just gone. And as well, you don't, we probably should say, you don't have to do the digital badge in order to engage with this impact framework. It can absolutely be used by anybody, and we'd be encouraging people to use it, and to think about using it kind of on a programmatic level, beyond just simply you as an individual educator or as a student support and so on. Okay, we will leave it there unless you have any questions. We're very happy to hear from you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Daniel and Kathy and Lisa. It's been a wonderful, wonderful partnership that we have with UCD as well. So I'm happy to see you here in the front row, as always. For